The music for this level is my piano recording of the James Bond theme by Monty Norman. Norman's inspiration for the theme came from a song he'd written for a musical about an Indian community in Trinidad. The song, called Bad Sign, Good Sign, featured a distinctive rhythm that Norman later incorporated into the Bond theme. The James Bond theme is instantly recognizable and has become a cornerstone of the franchise's identity. It's been used in numerous films and has inspired countless musical variations. I picked this music because the latter part of the level reminds me of a secret base in a James Bond movie. As far as James Bond goes, I hate the books, but love the movies. Goldfinger by Ian Fleming, the 7th volume in a classic novel series that detail the world-famous exploits of British secret agent, otherwise known as James Bond. The novel has the same plot as its movie adaptation, which is arguably more famous than the book ever was. Bond has to stop the dastardly Auric Goldfinger from stealing all of the billions in Fort Knox and using the money to finance anti-American spy interests. To someone completely unfamiliar to spy novels, this concept might seem breathtaking, just as the back cover claims, but to an experienced reader, the plot is rather typical and unexceptional in any way. For a classic novel such as Goldfinger, a description like typical is actually more compliment than insult, since classics are, by definition, made up of what we know. Calling a classic typical is really just a way of admitting the extent that certain elements of it have invaded pop consciousness. There are many typical James Bond elements in this story. Some work, and some don't, but all of them are classic. Thinking about what doesn't work, the villain's method of killing, James Bond is always comical. We get the famous, "Here is how we are going to punish you," with this slowly rotating saw moving at 1 centimeter per minute. Now excuse me while I leave the room, Mr. Bond, to serve myself a cup of tea. The villains attempting to do the killing are typical cartoonish James Bond bad guys with smirk-worthy names such as Oddjob and Pussy Galore. You'll find no evidence morally gray, complex characters here, not even among the good guys. But at least James Bond will take a moment to reflect on somebody he just killed while sipping his morning booze. And at least James Bond knows how to kill. The prose is worthy of neither praise nor condemnation. Ian Fleming efficiently tells the story, which I suppose is all I have a right to expect. But I expected more anyway. I have no specific criticism of the way it was written, other than the writing was standard, which I found disappointing. That doesn't mean I found it boring, though. Goldfinger is a thriller that successfully managed to thrill. Nearly every chapter ended in a plot twist, and this kept me happily engaged for the couple of hours it took to read it cover to cover. I should add, though, the lengthy and completely unnecessary descriptions of golfing at the beginning wasn't a high point. Golfing just doesn't have the sexiness of car chases. The book is most fascinating as a document that reflects the sexism and racism of a mostly vanished era, an era where, for example, Koreans are genetically more cruel, and lesbianism is an unfortunate but predictable outcome of allowing women to vote. These ideas are so ludicrous, they would be genuinely laughable. But for the fact that I know of people who earnestly believe both these things, overall, Goldfinger was a decent book that has aged reasonably well. It managed to entertain me and make me feel better about how far most of society has progressed in such a short time. I'll probably read another Bond novel if I have nothing better to do. The movie is much better. Took until the 3rd installment of the Ian Fleming-based James Bond spy movie franchise for its identity to crystallize. Following on the successful heels of Dr. No and From Russia with Love, both directed by Terrence Young, Sean Connery's early mentor for the urban leading role, Goldfinger marked a significant upgrade in production values that would make everything about the franchise iconic. Budgeted at more than the cost of the first two films combined, Goldfinger launched the ritual of beginning each subsequent Bond film with a stand-alone mission sequence for the fictional British MI6 agent, known by his code number 07 to show off his stuff. Other customs follow. An assignment meeting with British Secret Service Head M allows for the otherwise autonomous Mr. Bond to have his feathers clipped while being informed of his latest mission. A little office flirtation with Secretary Ms. Moneypenny squeezes into a meeting with resident Gadget Master Q, who gets Bond up to speed on the state of art devices that the audience can expect to see employed throughout the movie. From here on, female characters would be sexier and more dangerous, yet also more likely to die. Exotic set pieces would be epic in scale. The series' signature nuanced tone, straddling dualities such as dry humor and outrageous danger, would be more pronounced. Goldfinger is practically the template for the modern action blockbuster, yet still it's impossible to hate. In fact, it's deucedly hard not to love, simply because everything it does so much better than its inheritors. A handful of other Bond flicks qualify as more serious suspense, and one, Skyfall, even borders on flawless. But Goldfinger will always be the best. For the same reason the Beatles will always be the best rock act in Peanuts, will always be the best American comic strip. It's a phenomenon that defines its category. I should say a word or two about film, generally speaking. A common claim on numerous film forums, podcasts, news comment sections, and especially YouTube videos, is the assertion that evaluations of film quality are subjective, and that those of us who rightly point out that, for example, The Last Jedi is an objectively terrible film are wrong by default. I think this philosophy is bullshit. Advocating that art and art criticism are based purely on individual need, jerk reactions of creativity, and interpretations of such creativity, respectively, devalues the art and all who work to understand it. Claiming that film content and cinematic quality are subjective is the lamest, laziest, most cop out-answer one can make in film criticism, similar to how people of faith propose to explain away the existence of a higher power by saying, God works in mysterious ways. Allegations of film's subjectivity are worse than a bad or nonsensical argument against or for a particular film. It is not even an argument. It is a non-answer, a half-hearted throw your hands up in the air straw man defense for people too lazy or ignorant to defend their position, while no filmmaker or film academic is entirely free from biased perception of the world around them. Some are clearly more free than others and are better able to dissociate their personal views and experiences from limiting their understanding of other people and their artistic expression. For that is what a true review is, an assessment of a film that is as free as possible from personal biases, which is backed by rational arguments, concrete examples, i.e. evidence of quality, and detailed explanation. A good reviewer does not only tell you whether a movie sucks or not, they explain why, and in detail. There are oceans of difference in splitting hairs and disparate quality. It may be futile to determine whether a cinematic landmark like Citizen Kane is really better or worse than an American classic like The Godfather, but much larger contrasts in cinematic craft exist in excess and speak to the very real nature of objective cinematic quality. For instance, compare either of the former to anything Adam Sandler has ever done, or any blockbuster from Transformers. Age of Extinction, my assertion that Fight Club is a better piece of cinematic art than Transformers isn't my opinion. It's a fucking fact. In other words, While it may be impossible to prove with 100% certainty the precise cinematic quality of all films relative to each another, that doesn't mean cinematic quality doesn't exist, or that isn't objectively measurable in some way based on the craftsmanship in the art of film making, independent of our own personal positive or negative evaluations of a film, like, I liked it, or I hated it, alleging that cinematic quality and craftsmanship are subjective is akin to giving everyone gold stars for trying in Little League Soccer, or an A for effort in academia. This bullshit philosophy only devalues the entire craft of not only film itself, but film criticism as well, because it argues that there is actually no craft in either of them. This is an essay I wrote called Why I Hate Forced Diversity in Film. Politics, properly defined, is simply the process by which decisions are made that affect large numbers of people. Government is a species of politics. Equality is politics because there is a real debate going on about the best way for everyone to actually be equal. Unfortunately, many SJWs act as though their position is the only way to attain equality, and that if you oppose them, you must be a racist or a bigot. Many SJWs dishonestly argue that equality isn't politics, implying that his or her political opinions on how to achieve equality is the same thing as equality itself, and that having a different viewpoint is like saying you think women should stay in the kitchen or something. It isn't, movie pundit. And you have many people in your audience who disagree with your political opinions why there is a gender wage gap, and if we should eradicate it, for example, or just want to talk about movies, not divisive social political issues, because they are sick of being called a racist for having a different point of view. Most other creatives scare me away, like John Campea does when he makes videos talking about the backlash to The Last Jedi. I'm worried that most of the show is going to involve a 30-minute Campea-style rant about how evil those of us are who oppose social justice warriors for such things like confusing equality of outcome with equality of opportunity, and for saying that because there isn't exactly an equal amount white people and minorities being cast in movies made in white majority countries with few minority actors, that this is somehow evidence of institutional racism. He has welcomed his opinion, but I personally just want to talk about movies and would rather not hear any divisive political opinions, honestly, because I am tired of his disrespect. I think the new Star Wars movies represent a new low in terms of sacrificing plot and character development for the sake of diversity, and this has resulted in some very poor films indeed. Although that is far from the only problem with these movies. Let me say first of all that I do not care about black people or females in stories in general. Lando was black. Who cares? Doesn't matter. What matters is that Lando fits the story. The issue in regards to the newer movies is it seems like they are casting females in roles, not because it fits the story, but because they have some pro-feminist leanings that are taking precedence over the story. Like, they cast females in positions of leadership purely because they want to prove that females can be leaders too, as if anyone doubted that. Or they made Rhea a girl purely because Luke was a boy, so now it's the girl's turn. I think casting characters in a movie to meet the demands of a political worldview and its incorrect notion of equality is ultimately a disservice to not only the art of filmmaking, but also the audience who just want to be entertained. If you are someone like Kathleen Kennedy seems to be, who will so disservice both filmmaking and your audience for your severed, probably well-intentioned but misguided need for social justice, then there's probably someone out there better suited for your job. While I agree with people that it is unreasonable to hate The Last Jedi purely because of its SJW politics, it is also very reasonable to complain about its inclusion in Star Wars, given the fact that previously it was a political franchise not driven by an agenda. It certainly wasn't SJW. Has anyone ever noticed that the druids in the original trilogy are basically slaves, and Chewbacca is a racist stereotype of an Indian savage? I would say that if there is anyone saying that just because there is lots of women as, and even an Asian, in The Last Jedi, that means the film is SJW propaganda, that person is a fucking idiot who represents the vast minority of people, and we all should ignore them, instead of giving them the attention they desire and pretending this is a bigger issue than it really is. Or worse, pretending that that small group of individuals, along with everyone else who ever said anything negative online about identity politics, are all backwards cousin fucking racists. And spare me the backwards logic about how my noticing that other people have a political agenda and saying I don't want, like it means that I have an agenda, because my noticing that the THUI have an agenda and perhaps being irritated by it is not the same thing as having an agenda myself. I will never understand why some people value diversity so much. I understand if you, movie pundit, just want more types of stories told from new perspectives, and that makes complete sense to me. What I mean is, I will never understand why some black people get excited about BLA, say, Pantichiar, because they're black too, as if the character being like you somehow trumps the quality of the movie. The whole representation argument is just nonsense to me. I am a cripple, but I have never felt the need to see more cripples in movies. I'm not opposed to it per se. I just don't give a fuck one way or the other. Unless they try to make a cripple-centric action movie, because that sounds like a terror ideology idea. Because I don't judge anyone by their color, race, or any attribute they did not pick for themselves. If I wanted to play the identity politics game, I could just as easily make the case that this film is bad for black people. Watch. Wakanda is a racist black ethno-state that, of course, being populated by blacks, only gained its wealth and superiority through a freak accident of history. I could do that, but I won't, because that's dumb. This movie is not significant for any reason. It's not even the first black film of the genre. I don't think Blade was either, but I miss the days of Blade where nobody cared it starred a black guy. We just loved it because it was a good movie. To be honest with you, I don't even think true 50 either 50 diversity in Hollywood of the sort that would make everyone happy is even possible, not for race, gender, or even sexual preference. Do you remember when ScarJo was set to play a transgender and was forced to back out of the role thanks to the public outrageously demanding that only a transgender person in real life play a transgender on screen? I think these people are vastly overestimating the bank ability and availability of trans actors. I believe truly trans people are less than 1% of the population. Unless presented with contrary evidence, I'm going to assume a similar statistic can be applied to actors who are trans. But wait, that's not all. Then you need to consider that only about 1% of actors attain any kind of notable success at all. That means that, forgive me for not doing the math, but I'm a bi man, and bi men suck at math for the most part. Look it up. The number of noteworthy trans actors must be astonishingly small. Besides, casting directors can't pick from any actor in the world. They usually put out casting calls, which an agent then has to submit an actor for, which means the actor in most cases needs to be somewhat nearby and able to go in and audition locally. And even then, Directors like to stick with actors they know and trust anyway. All these factors make it very difficult to find trans actors. I'm sorry this is a difficult reality to accept. But then the whole point of acting is to pretend to be something you're not anyway, so who cares? I just wish entertainment would stop their agenda of forced diversity, and movie pundits would go back to talking about something they are qualified to talk about: movies, particularly if all they are going to do is spew partisan talking points and insult anyone who disagrees as a basement-dwelling cousin Humper. Actors and pundits know about as much about politics as my plumber does, and I don't really want to hear about politics from any of them for that reason. It isn't that I feel a plumber can't believe in equality, it's just that I paid the man to do a job, and I'd like him to do what he's paid for. Not show up to my house and while fixing it, deliver a sermon on the gender pay gap. I tell that fucker to do his job. Likewise, entertainers, when they are being public entertainers, should be entertaining me, not being my moral compass and making me want to turn the TV off. Hate is good. People often dismiss hate as useless and claim love will heal the world. I disagree with this view. I think that not only is hate useful, but in certain situations, hate is the only appropriate response to a situation. I think in certain situations, if you want to unite the world, to change it for the better, hate, not love, is most often the appropriate catalyst for doing so. If you want to say or do something that will rouse people to action, say or do something bound to be controversial. Aim to make them hate you, and you will inspire more people to get off their asses and do something than 100 useless speeches about love and the brotherhood of man. Love, respect, friendship, these things do not unite people as much as a common hatred for something. And unlike love, hatred is clear, metallic, one-handed, and unwavering. People who hate something passionately usually have one specific goal in mind when it comes to the things they hate: to wipe it from the earth. And they will pursue this goal committedly until that goal is achieved. You can possibly be just as driven by love in the same way that you can be by hate. But how many people have rashly declared undying love for a person only to gradually fall out of love with them? Whatever that number is, it is far greater than the number of people who have declared they hate killing only to realize they don't. Hate is the surer bet. It lasts longer. There are a number of things I hate, yes. Racism, sexism, homophobia. If the hatred that I have for these things are defects in my character, so be it. I proudly accept these defects. I refuse to love these things or even extend a loving hand to anyone who is being racist, sexist, or homophobic. Fuck them and fuck anyone who says I should. Look into my heart and try to love them. Fuck love. You can love them if you choose, but as far as these matters are concerned, they do not deserve mine, and they can't have it. I hate political correctness. I'm sick of political correctness. Instead of being an effective tool against hate speech, it just forces decent people to circumvent the truth, to avoid sounding racist, sexist, or homophobic, while simultaneously making actual racist, sexist, or homophobic people harder to spot, because they aren't as blatantly offensive as they once were. Today, political correctness is nothing more than a shield people use when they are tired of reality coming along and hurting their feelings. The problem is that everyone is offended by something. Being politically correct all the time is pointless, because you can't please everyone. In certain contexts, some words are inappropriate, while in some contexts, the same words are not. No one word is offensive on its own. Not even the word nigger, which is much worse than calling someone black. It's not the words you use that matter, it's the intent behind the words that count. Nigger, nigger, nigger. Does the use of the word seem offensive to you? It shouldn't be. It is very common to hear people say, I'm offended by that, as if it gives them certain rights. It shouldn't. It is nothing more than a whine, and it has no meaning or purpose. There is no reason for me to respect that as a phrase. From From now on, the next time somebody tells me, I'm offended by that. Unless you are my close friend, and I actually care how you feel, my response will be, so fucking what? I hate the racism of social justice, the tribalism and anti-liberalism that permeates the identity politics promoted by the regressive left is self-evident to anyone who has been paying attention to the metastatic growth of the contemporary social justice movement over the last few years. While liberalism as a philosophy has always supported things like freedom of speech and expression, civil discussion and the free exchange of ideas, and judging individuals based on their character, not superficial things like skin color or gender, the illiberal left opposes all of these things. Illiberal leftism has rejected liberalism's tendency to judge individuals as individuals and instead adopted their approach of judging people on the basis of what group they belong to and race and gender politics. Social justice extremists have literally redefined what racism is in order to justify their own racism. In their view, their actions are justified as they are a natural response to oppression. It seems very likely that the rise of the regressive left has resulted in more racial animosity between whites and non-whites. When a person is told, or it is implied, that they are a bad person because of their skin color, sexual orientation, or whatnot, it is natural for them to start to associate even more with that group identity based on those characteristics, rather than seeing themselves as an individual. And if you put people into groups based on superficial characteristics, and then designate one group, white people, as an oppressor class, members of whom are only successful because of some unearned privilege, and another as the oppressed class, minorities, especially blacks, members of whom are only unsuccessful because their oppressed status, naturally division and hatred between the members of these groups is going to emerge. The rise of right-wing populism is thus almost certainly a reaction to left-wing identity politics, which paints whites in a negative light. Instead of fostering a unified society where people see themselves as individuals rather than a part of a particular group, the social justice movement is likely responsible for further dividing people along tribalistic lines. Surely, there are vastly better means to eradicate racism and sexism from society than the identity politics upon which the social justice movement is based. Systemic racism is the holy ghost of the religion of anti-racism, propped up by a racism of the gaps non-argument. Find some inevitable disparity between different races in the statistical data collected on any indescribably vast topic we collect virtually infinite data points on, and immediately plug in racism as an explanation for the disparity. Black Lives Matter pretend believe police brutality is a big problem, specifically for black people, because of a few cherry-picked examples which confirm their police are brutal and anti-colored people, bias, while ignoring the obvious fact that most police officers don't engage in police brutality and have an indisputably net positive impact. And by assuming any negative interaction between a black and a cop, or any disparity between blacks and whites when it comes to Tesla, for example, arrest rates, must be because systems are systemically racist against them. Religious cults and political ones use the same methods to control people, lie to them, make them stupid, and keep them scared. The sales pitch is exactly the same. Everyone else is lying to you. You can only trust us. Only we can save you. Believe what we tell you, and do as we say, or the boogeyman is going to get you. It's the entire hook of religious cults, and the reason right-wing politicians always pander to evangelicals. It's easy to convince ignorant, superstitious, fearful people who already believe a load of rubbish to believe even more rubbish, and convince them to vote against their own best interests. That's really all there is to it, and it only takes 60 seconds to explain. Like any other cult, anti-racist religionists tell a tall tale of a sickness of original sin, a systemic racism handed down through generations, that demands that you fix the problem by being an anti-racist, too, or be rejected, outcast, never mind the lack of evidence. Feel. It's an immorally infantile mentality, insanity, as worthy of contempt as every David Duke in a suit, or Kanye West with his Hail Hitler, attention-grabbing antics, and in black KKK outfit. People who espouse these infantile beliefs need to hated and despised and relegated to the fringes of political discourse in the same way Pat Robertson was that crazy lunatic who blamed hurricanes on homosexual activity. Systemic racism education is in fact anti-factual indoctrination and worthy of the same ridicule and academic scorn as flat earth creationism. It belongs in the far left's version of a church and nowhere near our education system. Once it has been effectively cast to the fringes, we can embrace the near-post racial and colorblind society we once had in the 1990s and live in love and peace once more slavery was 400 years ago. There are hardly any racists in America. There is only the fake concept of institutional racism, that vague, shadowy presence responsible for all society's ills. Your mama became a prostitute, and after having sex with 1 million men, gave birth to you, a failed coat hanger abortion baby who, without parental guidance, grew up in a tribal black community that preaches black solidarity through selling drugs and gang violence, causing you to be imprisoned. Well, that's not your fault. You have no agency. It's racism. All because your great-great-great-great-grandfather was a slave. You can't do anything about it. And all those conservatives who want to promote changes in the culture that might improve conditions for black people, they are just racist apologists making excuses for racism. The ideology I am speaking out against is a cancerous one, which casts black people as the eternal oppressed, and the white people in society as the enemy. It promotes and stokes racial enmity in a society that otherwise could have moved beyond such nonsense, and teaches black people a new version, or racism, which is like the bottom of an iceberg, even if you cannot see it. It is always there just beneath the surface. The fact that something is preventing your ship moving forward is evidence enough. Imagine with me a black man named Free Man. Free. Man has seen through the mental prison, the ideological, metaphorical iceberg. He understands there is nothing tangible holding the black man back. He is equal under the law, and has been for as long as he has been alive. He knows he is not owed anything else, and that is the liberation he needs to succeed. His boat is populated by all different races of crew he can rely upon to help him steer his ship, and he sails towards his goals. But he looks sadly at his brothers in their boats, where the black and white crew members just fight among themselves and shoot holes in their own boats in an attempt to kill each other, all because of an argument about what to do about the fictional iceberg. Free Man, full of compassion, shouts to his brothers the obvious truth that the iceberg is not real. For that crime, half his brothers in the other boats think he is crazy or trying to get them to submit to the iceberg and sink because they can't understand his message. The rest follow Free Man as he passes, having learned to love and accept their crew and ignore the fictional iceberg. To end the video, a series of audio quotations from brilliant and famous black men.
Do you think that race plays a part in wealth distribution, or either a mindset that you can't or cannot? Yeah.
No.
You don't?
No, I don't. You and I, we're proof. Why would race have anything to do with it? Put your mind to what you want to do and go for that. It's kind of like religion to me. It's a good excuse for not getting it.
You know, I said, and it's probably getting in trouble, but I said to some of my colleagues, and so I know that it's an issue, but it seems like every single day on television I'm talking about race, and it's because of the news cycle, it's in the news, but sometimes I get so tired of talking about it, I want to just go, this is over, can we move on?
And if you talk about it, it exists.
Right.
Yeah. It's not like it exists and we refuse to talk about it, but making it a bigger issue than it needs to be is a problem.
And, you know, incarceration rates in America has been a problem, especially as opposed to minorities. And Roman delves into the issues around the legal system. Do you think we've made any headway in the
I
legal
think it's more important to make headway in our own house. By the time the system comes into play, the damage is done.
They're not locking up 7-year-olds. I was in Chicago a couple of 3-4 weeks ago, and we saw these little kids on bikes with masks on the side of their head, like 5 or 6 of them. And the driver said, yeah, they're little yummies. I said, who? He said, little yummies. Look up, Google little yummy. Little yummy was 11 years old. And you look at his picture, you see the headshot of him, he's like this. And he got murdered at 11 by a 14-year-old who's doing like that 16-year-old.
Makes no sense.
You blame the system? Where was his father?
Black History Month, you find
Ridiculous.
Why?
You're gonna relegate my history to a month? Oh. What do you do with yours? Which month is White History Month?
Well, I'm Jewish.
Okay, which month is Jewish History Month?
There isn't one.
Oh. Why? Do you want one?
No.
All right, I don't either. I don't want a Black History Month. Black history is American history. It starts in the house. It starts in the home. And yeah, well, my father got locked up. Well, where was his father?
Yeah.
Like I did talk about my 3 closest friends, and they did, 15 to 25. One did 28. I was only one of the 3 that had a father. And even though my parents were together, but I still had a father who was a gentleman and a good example. Yeah. They didn't. We can blame the system if we want, but they didn't lock any of us up at 7.
Yeah.
We were all doing enough to get locked up at 13. My parents sent me in another direction. They didn't have anybody to help them, and they kept doing what they was doing, and the system got them. So I don't, the system is rigged, but why? All the more reason not to help it.
What's to be gained? You stop in one split second to think. Burning and looting doesn't help you in any way.
The number one problem domestically facing this country is the breakdown of the family. And President Obama said it, I didn't. A black kid, or a kid, not just a black kid, a kid raised without a dad is 5 times more likely to be poor and commit crimes, 9 times more likely to drop out of school, and 20 times more likely to end up in jail. So you're far more likely to end up in jail without having a dad than you are because of a white racist cop.
For example, I got both of my brothers. I know what's in my window, flashes light in my face, hand on my pistol. I can handle that 2 ways. I can start yelling and screaming and tell him he a racist and he don't know me. You doing this wrong. Or I can say, yes, officer, no, officer, or we done, officer. And both of them are gonna have drastically different outcomes.
Half the homicides in this country are committed by and against black people. Last year, there were 14,000 homicides. I'm not talking about suicides, I'm talking about homicides. Half of them were black, 96% of them black on black of that 7,000. Where's the Black Lives Matter people on that?
I understand y'all upset. But like it was already said, I doubt y'all half as upset as I am. So if I'm not over here wilding out, if I'm not over here blowing up stuff, if I'm not over here messing up my community, then what are y'all doing?
I will always continue to say that riots are socially destructive and self-defeating. I'm still convinced that non-violence is the most potent weapon available to oppress people in their struggle for freedom and justice. I feel that violence will only create more social problems than they will solve.
Let's switch it up, y'all. Let's switch it up. Do this, He loved it here. He started driving truck. He was good. So I highly doubt. No, I don't know. I know he would not want y'all to be doing it.
So I will continue to condemn riots and continue to say to my brothers and sisters that this is not the way. Continue to affirm that there is another way.
Say, I don't want to support the Black Lives Matter movement. At the end of the day, motherfucker, you know how many black people voted for fucking Donald Trump? You don't like what the fuck I say, get off my fucking page. You motherfuckers come all the way to my page, bitch ass niggas, fuck out of here. I had to bury my son because of black on black crime. 4 fucking years old. I had to bury my man because of black on black crime. I had to bury my brother because of black on black crime. Fuck your Black Lives Matter. Fucking respect the badge. Nigga, the police tell you get on the fucking ground, you lay on the fucking ground. Respect the fucking badge. That's the problem. Ain't no fucking order in this fucking world. Fuck you and your Black Lives Matter. All lives fucking matter.
Because people don't know how to handle their anger. They out here shooting people and acting a fool, and nobody's holding them accountable. And I don't know if will they catch the people who did this? Are they going to get justice? Probably not. 83% of the homicides are unsolved in Chicago, Illinois. That's one part of one city in one state in the United States of America. And y'all talking about police brutality. Let me give you more stats. In 2019, there was only 9 unarmed black people who were shot by police in 2019. Guess how many were shot in Minneapolis or Minnesota as a state? 1. And just because you're unarmed don't mean you're not a deadly threat. So just for the sake of argument, just say all of them were wrongfully shot. There's 44 million black people in this country. In 2019, 9 of them were shot by police. 7,000 or so of them were killed by other black people. And the tunes of hundreds of thousands have died from heart disease and other ailments that y'all won't even bring up, and you claim to care about black lives.
What is racism?
I don't know. Racism, if you go back and see what people like Martin Luther King and Bayard Rustin and the other civil rights leaders thought the word racism meant in the early 60s, they said that it means when one person says to another, I don't recognize you as the same as me because of your race. That's a very intuitive definition for most people. No doubt it's blurry at the edges, like what the concept is, but it's pretty clear to people what that kind of racism means. But then in 1967, there was a book written called Black Power by Stokely Carmichael and Charles Hamilton, which used the phrase institutional racism for the first time, which there's many synonyms for it: structural racism, systemic racism. And the idea here was that racism is not reducible to individuals. It's not reducible to the attitudes that one human being holds towards another, whether conscious or not, but it somehow is a feature of the system itself. And so what that has done is, I think it's, as Douglas Murray often says, writer, the anti-racist movement and the anti-fascist movement has had a supply and demand problem, which is that the number of true racists and fascists used to be huge, and now it's very, very small. And like any movement that actually achieves its aims, any movement that is capable of reducing something, to the extent that it's successful, it obviates the need for its own existence. It's a sad paradox of laudable organizations. If you're Mothers Against Drunk Driving, to take a random example, and you actually succeed in reducing drunk driving by 90%, you kind of eliminate the need for your own existence, which is, no kind of reward for doing great work.
The instrumental for this level is my piano rendition of songs that Italian progressive rock band Goblin recorded for the horror film known as Susperia. This stunning soundtrack from 1977 is the favorite of many a Goblin fan because it represents their sound carried to its most powerful and intense extremes. Susperia was another score for their cinematic alter ego, director Dario Argento, and backed up the story of a girl who enrolls in a German dance academy only to discover It is a cover for a powerful coven of witches. The music is just as scary as the film itself, blending wailing electric guitar, whooping synthesizers, and screaming wordless cries into a spooky, bombastic sound that manages to be terrifying even without the benefit of the film's gruesome images. Susperia has long been popular with heavy metal fans because it sports a hard, rocky edge equal in intensity to the scariest works of Black Sabbath or King Diamond. The title theme slowly builds a spooky riff on bells, acoustic guitar, and synthesizer until it erupts into a hard, rocking mid-section where nimble synthesizer solos spar with ghostly cries of witch, switch, and sighs, mixes panting, wordless vocals with an array of furious power chords to create an unbearably high level of suspense. Even when the score downplays the gothic rock theatrics on subtler tracks like Black Forest and Blind Concert, the group's members still manage to create an intensely creepy atmosphere. The end result is an album that is guaranteed to please Goblin fans and is highly likely to appeal to fans of gothic and heavy metal sounds. I should probably talk a little bit about the film Susperia. I should probably talk about the script and dialogue. There are old video games out there with better dialogue and voice acting than this film. The film's credits hint that the English dialogue was dubbed onto the film after filming, and it really shows. The dialogue in Susperia is often considered unnatural and stiff, partly due to the dubbing process, where actors were speaking in different languages. Imagine the voice acting in a 1990s video game, and this should give you a vague idea of what to expect. Likewise, imagine the exposition-heavy and functional script of an old video game, and it wouldn't be too far from parts of this film's script. Many actors in Susperia spoke in their native languages, Italian, English, Swiss, which were then dubbed into English. This process can sometimes result in dialogue that sounds unnatural or stiff, especially when the dubbing is of poor quality, but the film does have some good points. As for the film's horror elements, although experienced fans of the horror genre will probably only find it moderately creepy, it still had me on the edge of my seat a few times. A lot of this film's best horror elements are often slightly more on the subtle side of things, and the film primarily relies on lots of nails, biting suspense, whispering voices, a creepy atmosphere, occult moments, ominous mysteries, and a few subtly chilling characters to unsettle the viewer. Although there are certainly some jump scares and other shocking moments that will make you wince and flinch, this film is more of a slow burn than you might expect. Surprisingly, this film isn't as gory as you might expect. However, the film's relatively few gruesome moments will shock you and linger in your memory because of their design, rather than the relatively small amount of bright red stage blood on screen. Like in old school video nasties, some 1970s, 80s horror novels, and the Saw movies, this film's stylized scenes of gory horror have a cruel inventiveness and dark grand guignol theatricality to them that is far more disturbing than anything you actually see on screen. This film is a masterclass on how to make low-budget gory horror actually scary. Although many of the gore effects are very obviously cheap practical effects, they still have an incredible impact because the film not only knows what to leave to the imagination, making these effects seem even gorier than they actually are, but because the real horror comes from what is actually happening. The gore effects are secondary to the horror of the bizarre and cruel events that cause them to appear. Even without a single drop of stage blood, these moments would still be incredibly disturbing. All in all, this film is beautiful work of art, with a capital A2. Almost every frame of this film wouldn't be out of place in an art gallery, yes. Some elements of it are a bit corny or wooden, but like the random studio clips, and mistakes in Beatles songs, Susperia is a creative and unique film that transcends its low budget limitations and becomes something more than just a horror movie. Some critics argue that Susperia reinforces patriarchal stereotypes and misogynistic tropes through its portrayal of female characters. The film's narrative, which revolves around a female lead discovering a coven of witches, has been interpreted as a representation of female power and agency, while also being seen as a way to demonize and punish women. The film's focus on female characters, particularly in the context of the coven, has also been interpreted as a commentary on the patriarchal control and oppression of women. At its best, feminism is the moronic idea that we can make both sexes equal by focusing only on the issues of one of them. At its worst, it is an organized male hate group, where its members act as though they are victims of some imagined oppression. Other than being the world's most effective contraceptive, is feminism actually useful in any way? Or when two feminists jump off a cliff, is that just a win for society? Feminists are largely spoiled, middle-class white girls unaccustomed to concepts like accountability or responsibility, and courage is a rare sight with them. The Middle East and Western Africa are burning. Iran is raping female civilians and torturing political prisoners. The Pakistani Taliban are shooting young girls in the head for trying to get an education and disfiguring them with acid if their veils are askew. And yet, passed no resolution opposing this. The new pseudo-feminists are more concerned with racism than with sexism, and disproportionately focused on Western imperialism, colonialism, and capitalism than on Islam's long and ongoing history of imperialism, colonialism, anti-black racism, slavery, forced conversion, and gender and religious apartheid. Why? Some feminists invoke misogyny at every turn, but fail to look in the mirror and see any misandry. This creates some severe hypocrisy around language, which of course is an entire patriarchal structure that supposedly privileges men, as on the basis of a few conventions, which actually don't. They seem to take this as a license to dictate how men should speak. But in classic feminist double, standard mode fail to apply the rules to themselves. What we are really seeing is a system that privileges women and their right not to be offended by a man. One common insult form is to compare someone to an animal. Many women do not think twice about bitch and use it themselves. Are they expressing self-loathing and internalized misogyny? When feminists call men pigs or dogs, aren't they doing the same thing in reverse? Of course they are, even though they may not consider the words gendered. But they will still complain that misogyny is oppressive and misandry doesn't exist, let alone oppress anyone. This isn't a case of men being privileged and women being oppressed by language. It's a failure by these feminists and their theories to account for reality and realize we are both in the same boat. Misandry and misogyny are two sides of the same sexism coin. If using a word like cunt, for example, makes one de facto a misogynist, then the use of the word dick should make one a misandrist in any reasonable world. The reality is, the word cunt is only offensive because women say it is, and dick isn't because no one cares if you offend a man. The feminist secret weapon here is patriarchy. Under patriarchy, especially as evidenced by medieval chivalry and Victorian morality, offending a woman's honor is a grave moral offense. That is all that is happening with the feminist language police. They are enforcing patriarchal rules about offending women rather than smashing them. They are using sexism to privilege women and control men. Radical Islam is misogyny personified, which is why I chuckle at the Free Palestine, supporting retards who pretend Israel is a terrorist nation. Real misogyny shoots you in the head. What radical Islam does is remind feminists that if patriarchy were a real thing in our culture, If misogyny were a real thing, if men hated women and wanted them chained in basements, they would be chained in basements. In actual fact, Western men are the most indulgent, permissive, tolerant men you will find anywhere on the planet, and in the face of real misogyny, whining feminists end up looking like petulant toddlers tossing expensive toys out of their designer prams, complaining they are oppressed. Fuck it. Rant on Islam incoming. Introduction for all those who might have asked me, why do you care what religious people believe? How does what they believe hurt you or anybody else? Why can't you just respect their beliefs and leave it at that? Here's your answer. Kim Davis, the fucking Christo, fascist cunt. Yes, I use the C word. Because she's a cunt if there ever was one whose fat sanctimonious holier than thou ass was in jail in Rowan County, Kentucky for refusing to do the government job she took an oath to do, and for contempt of court based on her 100% unprobable religious beliefs. She was not in jail because of her beliefs, or for practicing her religion, or because there is some kind of criminalization of Christianity going on. She was not being persecuted in any way. She went to jail because she broke the law by illegally trying to use her government office to force her beliefs on others, which violates the Constitution and the law of the land. She's been married 4 times and has divorced 3 different people. She's had children out of wedlock and she's committed adultery. A sin so big it made it into the mighty 10 commandments. Unlike that, gays are an abomination. Thing she quotes as her moral authority. She is a sinner of the highest order, yet we are supposed to believe that God has forgiven her for sins, which were 100% her choice, but that the same God would never forgive people he himself creates as a gay, something which gay people have no control over. Has anyone checked with Guinness? Kim Davis may have set a new record for self-righteousness. This is not about religious freedom. It's about retards, including Republican presidential candidates, trying to paint themselves as victims of some kind of war on religion. If a Muslim elected official had defied the Supreme Court and the 6th Circuit Federal Court and a state court by invoking their religion over the U.S. Constitution, every Republican would be having a hissy fit, pointing fingers and crying. See, we told you that the Muslims were instituting Sharia law here in our country, and that's why we need to care what other people believe. Well, you know what I believe. The only way they should let this knuckle-dragging bitch out of jail is if she prays to Jesus and Jesus breaks her out. Good luck with that. That said, if you actually believe that some mythical prophet rode a flying horse into heaven and met God, you need to have your head examined. If you think anyone who draws his likeness should be killed, you are one sick motherfucker. Islam deserves to be ridiculed for its insane beliefs and threats of violence against people exercising free speech and free expression. Take note, Christians, these people beat you out by a country mile for the batshit crazy award. It is obvious that Islam preaches violence. Quran dozens 191, 993. And slay them wherever ye find them, and drive them out of the places whence they drove you out. For persecution heard of Muslims is worse than slaughter hair of non-believers. But if they desist, then lo, Allah is forgiving and merciful. And fight them until persecution is no more. Is for Allah, as Quran 3:151. Soon shall we cast terror into the hearts of the unbelievers, for that they joined companions with Allah, for which he has sent no authority. Quran is 356. As to those who reject faith, I will punish them with terrible agony in this world and in the hereafter, nor will they have anyone to help. In what sense is this not violence? Muslims clearly do not read the Quran. If they did, they would know that those who would pick Islamic scripture, the Quran and the standard hadiths accepted by mainstream scholars, almost al-Buwayas do so by ignoring Nayas tafsir. the doctrine of abrogation, by which later revelations or hadiths relating stories from Muhammad's life from later periods take precedence over earlier ones, and, if inconsistent, supersede them. The doctrine of abrogation is now an arcane or extreme element of Islamic theology. It is a primary element of all of the mainstream schools of Islamic theology. Applying it makes almost all of the early, peaceful and tolerant revelations and elements of the Sunnah things that can be ignored by deeply devout Muslims. Islam is the biggest threat the civilized world has ever faced. Apologists for Islam can say what they like. It doesn't change what Islam says about itself. To know Islam, you must know Muhammad, one of the bloodiest figures in human history. Muhammad, the prophet of Islam, had people killed for insulting him or for criticizing his religion. This included women. Muslims are told to emulate the example of Muhammad. Muhammad said in many places that he has been ordered by Allah to fight men until they testify that there is no God but Allah and that Muhammad is his messenger. In the last 9 years of his life, he ordered no less than 65 military campaigns to do exactly that. Muhammad inspired his men to war with the basest of motives, using captured loot, sex, and a gluttonous paradise as incentives. He beheaded captives, enslaved children, and raped women captured in battle. Again, Muslims are told to emulate the example of Muhammad. After Muhammad died, the people who lived with him and knew his religion best immediately fell into war with each other. Fatima, Muhammad's favorite daughter, survived the early years among the unbelievers at Mecca safe and sound, yet died of stress from the persecution of fellow Muslims only 6 months after her father died. She even miscarried Muhammad's grandchild after having her ribs broken by the man who became the second caliph. Fatima's husband Ali, who was the second convert to Islam and was raised like a son to Muhammad, fought a civil war against an army raised by Aisha, Muhammad's favorite wife, and one whom he had said was a perfect woman. 10,000 Muslims were killed in a single battle waged less than 25 years after Muhammad's death. 3 of the first 4 Muslim rulers, caliphs, were murdered. All of them were among Muhammad's closest companions. The 3rd caliph was killed by allies of the son of the first Az, who was murdered by the 5th caliph a few years later, then wrapped in the skin of a dead donkey and burned. The 4th caliph, Ali, was stabbed to death after a bitter dispute with the 5th. The 5th caliph went on to poison one of Muhammad's 2 favorite grandsons. The other grandson was later beheaded by the 6th caliph. The infighting and power struggles between Muhammad's family members, closest companions, and their children only intensified with time. Within 50 short years of Muhammad's death, even the Kaaba, which had stood for centuries under pagan religion, lay in ruins from internal Muslim wars. And that's just the fate of those within the House of Islam. Muhammad directed Muslims to wage war on other religions and bring them under submission to Islam. Within the first few decades following his death, his Arabian companions invaded and conquered Christian, Jewish, Hindu, Buddhist, and Zoroastrian lands. A mere 25 years after Muhammad's death, Muslim armies had captured land and people within the borders of over 28 modern countries outside of Saudi Arabia. Muslims continued their jihad against other religions for 1400 years, checked only by the ability of non-Muslims to defend themselves. To this day, not a week goes by that Islamic fundamentalists do not attempt to kill Christians, Jews, Hindus, and Buddhists explicitly in the name of Allah. None of these other religions are at war with each other. Islam is the only religion that has to retain its membership by threatening to kill anyone who leaves. This is according to the example set by Muhammad. Islam teaches that non-Muslims are less than fully human. Muhammad said that Muslims can be put to death for murder, but that a Muslim could never be put to death for killing a non-Muslim. There are countless verses in the Quran that call for Muslims to wage violent warfare against non-believers. All the relatively peaceful verses are abrogated by the later violent verses, and this is exactly why Muslims will never run out of reasons to go to war. To see if Islam teaches violence, all you have to do is look at all the Muslims committing violent acts in the name of Islam. We can argue over which verses of the Quran are peaceful or violent, blah blah, but to see if Islam is violent, all you have to do is look what its adherents are doing. There are thousands of stories you can read every day about pious Muslims doing this or that heinous act and using the Quran to justify it. There are millions of peaceful Muslims, but that is because human beings inherently want to be peaceful. They are peaceful, INSPT, of being Islamic rather than because of it. The straightforward interpretation of Islam leads to suicide bombers, honor killings, female genital mutilations, and terrorist attacks, and all the other divine Islamic practices that disgust most people in the civilized world. If you want to see what an honest, straightforward application of Islam has in store, examine ISIS. Islam is hostile to women's rights. Islam causes female genital mutilation. There are indications that FGM might be a phenomenon of epidemic proportions in the Arab Middle East, especially at the village level, where many clerics insist it is required by the faith of Islam. Most studies speak of justifications and rationalizations for FGM, but do not speak of causes, since could implicate Islamic rules relating to women and sexual morality, and therefore would be considered an act of bigotry against Islam. Islam is regarded as a wrong justification, often with a citation that the Quran does not require FGM. That many women in northern Iraq, and presumably many women in Egypt, believe that the practice is rooted in religion is a factor ignored by Western universities and international organizations. Many experts hold that female genital mutilation is an African practice. Few reports mention the existence of FGM elsewhere in the Middle East, except in passing. A UNICEF report on the issue, for example, focuses on Africa and makes only passing mention of some communities on the Red Sea coast of Yemen. That all changed in early 2003 when AVDI, a German-Austrian NGO focusing on women's issues, started to work with mobile teams to take medical aid and social support to women in peripheral Kurdish areas, such as in the Gharmian region of Iraqi Kurdistan. These all female teams consisting of a physician, a nurse, and a social worker built trust and open doors in local communities, otherwise sealed against outsiders. After more than a year of working in the area, women began to speak about FGM. Kurds in the area practice sunnah circumcision. Midwives often perform the operation with unsterilized instruments or even broken glass, and without anesthesia on girls 4 to 12 years old. The extent of mutilation depends on the experience of the midwife and the luck of the girl. The wound is then treated with ash or mud, with the girls then forced to sit in a bucket of iced water. Many Kurdish girls die, and others suffer chronic pain, infection, and infertility. Many say they suffer symptoms consistent with post-traumatic stress disorder syndrome. Subsequent research found that 907 out of 1,544 women questioned had undergone genital circumcision, a cutting rate of nearly 60%. The discovery of widespread FGM in Iraqi Kurdistan suggests the assumption to be incorrect, that FGM is primarily an African phenomenon with only marginal occurrence in the Eastern Islamic world. If FGM is practiced at a rate of nearly 60% by Iraqi Kurds, then how prevalent is the practice in neighboring Syria, where living conditions and cultural and religious practices are comparable? According to Fran Hoskin, late founder of the Women's International Network News and author of groundbreaking research on FGM in 1975, there is little doubt that similar practices, excision, child marriage, and putting rock salt into the vagina of women after childbirth exist in other parts of the Arabian Peninsula and around the Persian Gulf. That no first-hand medical records are available for Saudi Arabia or from any other countries in that region does not mean that these areas are free of FGM, only that the societies are not free enough to permit formal study of societal problems. To deny that FGM is a especially widespread problem in the Islamic world, one would have to be ignorant of the facts or deliberately misrepresenting them. Clerics refer to the mention of female circumcision in the Hadith, for example, which is the relevant doctrinal document for theological reasons which are easily researchable. Even were that not the case, it is important to notice there is a certain tendency to confuse a liberal interpretation of Islam with the reality women face in many predominantly Islamic regions. In actuality, there are indications that FGM might be a phenomenon of epidemic proportions in the Arab Middle East, and Islam plays a key role in perpetuating the practice. I would never want to ban everyone who practices Islam, but I would ban the burqa, since women even in America are forced to wear one, and then to claim it was their choice to wear it. A woman dressed in a full burqa with just a slit for her eyes is an attack on the dignity of girls everywhere. There is something quite sinister about the religious expression of the burqa, which forces women and children to live their lives covered in cloth bags. The West should not abandon an immemorial tradition of equality and openness in order to gratify one faith, especially one has a very questionable record in respect to the dignity of females. The burqa is an offensive tool of oppression that remains permissible in Islam only because the Muslim world has been morally stagnate since the Dark Ages, and it should be banned outright in the U.S., as well as in any other country that professes to value its women. Like it or not, the state has the right to tell you how you may or may not dress. Much as I would like to, I cannot take off my pants in the supermarket. In our society, women must have the right to show their faces, which easily trumps the right of their male relatives or their male imams to decide otherwise. A ban on the burqa is a victory for sorority and liberty and equality. But modern feminists have nothing at all to say about all this. Seemingly, they will join Islamic retards in saying, I am Islamphobic. Let me quickly sum up the stupidest objection I will get from Islamic retards Islamist. Not all Muslims me, yeah, but a significant percentage Islamist prohibit me. Shows research, hard data, Islamist racist? Me. Islam isn't a racist, Islamist bigot. Me. No, bigotry is unjustified intolerance. 60% of Moroccan men said, if a woman is raped, she should marry her rapist. According to a survey I read, according to polls, 67% of Egyptians are worried about religious extremist groups in their country, and meanwhile, almost exactly the same number support killing people for leaving Islam. Extremist is in the eye of the beholder. Islamophobia is a word created by fascists and used by cowards to manipulate morons, until the world realizes that Islam, as believed by most of the Middle East currently, isn't a religion, but rather an ancient politicized totalitarian theocracy bent on world domination through the eradication of the infidel kafir by using subversive or militaristic means to establish a caliphate based upon Sharia law, which forces itself upon people who don't want it. We won't be able to effectively deal with it. Question: if a Muslim beats his wife, would it be domestic violence or child abuse? To close, let's listen to the fat, brownfellow, chunky yogurt of the Young Turks interview passionate anti-feminist Karen Strong. The conversation with Chunky starts out reasonable enough until Karen Strong begins to lay out the case for a reasonable, fact-based worldview that is different from his own. Taken momentarily outside of his protective, regressive echo chamber, He finds himself unable to summon a rational argument, so he compensates by getting louder, interrupting his guest, and even tells her to make him a sandwich.
What exactly is men's rights? What does that mean?
There are certain issues where men's rights are sort of routinely violated, at least on as far as an equality basis. There are certain situations men can find themselves in where they have essentially no due process, particularly domestic violence and sexual assault cases, where you can be put in jail without any kind of due process at all, or you can be kept from your home. And those types of things, while the laws tend to be gender neutral, they do disproportionately affect men. There's also there are some legal rights that men lack. The right to genital integrity is one of the big ones, and it's sort of it's a bone of contention among some in this movement, because there are some people who believe that circumcision should be banned, and then there are others who don't feel that way. But it is a very common complaint in the movement that circumcision is still legal and socially acceptable, while female genital mutilation is protected. It's banned under federal law in pretty much every Western country. There are fathers' rights issues that need addressing. There is a very large sentencing gap under the same conditions, in the same circumstances, committing the same crimes. Men are twice as likely to be incarcerated, and they serve generally 60 to 65% longer sentences. That's a wider gap than between blacks and whites in the U.S. So, I mean, there are a whole host of issues that deal with legislative problems and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Then there are social issues that need to be addressed, social issues of sexism and stuff like that. So,
you know, as you explain that whole penumbra of issues that men's rights deals with, it seems to me, as I suspected, that there are some things that clearly need addressed, and some things that people are probably unaware of. The sentencing point that you made are really interesting, and I'd like to know more about that, and I'll look into that. And, you know, parental rights for men, issues about how assets are split during divorce, those are all super interesting. I mean, there's a story in the news today about how Ken Griffin, who's a billionaire out of Chicago, is getting divorced, and his wife is $1 a month for because we're accustomed to the lifestyle of having not one, but two private jets.
Yeah, no, and it's not just $1 million. It's $1 million plus extraordinary expenses, like fueling the jets and travel expenses and stuff like that, right? And
they all sound like extraordinary expenses to me.
Well, but you look at it too when women, occasionally very wealthy women, get dinged with having to pay that kind of alimony. There's a huge outcry, and there's all kinds of like, how dare you treat a woman the way we've been treating men all along, right? That's unfair, right? It's suddenly unfair when it's the other way around. And I'm hoping that as more women end up having to pay alimony, that'll provide the impetus, the political will to do away with it, at least in terms of indefinite or lifetime alimony in states like Florida. So
right. So I think that there's a lot that we can agree on issues like that. On the other hand, I'm not sure that I agree on some of the other things that you mentioned, but that's why we want to talk this through and see where we stand on things. Okay. So when you say let's just take the right to genital integrity first. I'm amused by that language, but so do you? It's a wrong way of saying it. Do you understand? Do you agree that female genital mutilation and circumcision are not the same thing, that there is a legitimate reason to do a male circumcision, which is health? Now, you might disagree on that. I think a lot of people strongly disagree on whether there are good health reasons or not, but that's the main reason to do it. Whereas female genital mutilation, there is absolutely, positively no health consequences other than dire ones, and no benefits whatsoever, and it's done simply for, the honor of old customs and the pleasure of men, theoretically, etc. Like that, there's a big difference there.
There are differences for sure. Some forms of FGM are actually less severe than the typical circumcision, less damaging, less permanent, and others, of course, are much worse. But one of the issues around that is that you can actually find studies that have been done in places like Yemen and stuff like that, where FGM is still practiced. That show the exact same health benefits, a decrease in urinary tract infections and, a decrease in sexually transmitted infections and stuff like that. one of the things that most people don't know is that at least sort of secular communities in the U.S. in particular, circumcision began as a health issue, but it began during the nervous excitation theory of disease before we learned about germs and stuff like that. It was promoted by the guy who invented cornflakes, Dr. John Harvey Kellogg, I believe. And it was promoted as a way of preventing masturbation because masturbation was used back then to contribute to epilepsy and spinal bifida and spinal cord diseases and paralysis and all kinds of things like that. And you can find justifications, you can find medical papers all through the history that, that circumcision cures mental illness, circumcision cures epilepsy, circumcision cures this, it cures that, it cures paralysis, spinal paralysis, it cures all of these things. So it really has been, at least in the sort of the secular community or the non-Jewish, non-Muslim community, it has been a cure searching for a disease the whole time. And so there really is there's no explicit or definite health benefit that you can provide as far as circumcising a minor child. That's really the thing. I think that any man should have the choice to do that. But 4-day-old babies don't have sex. They're not going to get STIs. The urinary tract studies, because most full-term babies were circumcised at the time, the uncircumcised ones were generally preemies in the study. And so, of course, they're going to be more susceptible to urinary tract infections and other health problems.
All right. Karen, I don't want to spend too much time on that. I got it. I don't agree that it has the same implications and it's not the same meaning. But I understand that people can decide on their own whether they're in favor of circumcision or not. But if it was intended to cure masturbation, I can assure the audience that it has not worked.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. Okay. It really doesn't.
Okay, all right. But I mean, I don't want to get back into it, but female genital mutilation clearly. Whereas circumcision is not nearly as clear if it's even in that direction. Even if I granted that to you, it's certainly not like a worldwide thing like let's oppress men by circumcising them. So, okay.
Well, I mean, look at it this way: if it originated in order to suppress male sexuality, then one might actually come to the conclusion that it is there to control the behavior.
Okay, I mean, the last thing I'll say on that is that religion wants to oppress all of us. So, okay, now let's back up a little bit and talk about general things because I'm curious, where you come at it from a wider look at this. So, there's a lot of talk about feminists in your writing, and I just want to make sure that we're talking about the same things here because do you grant that feminists for a long time did great work in getting women rights that they clearly did not have, and that today there might be a strand of radical feminism that you disagree with, and I would be surprised if I didn't disagree with, but that there's a distinction between those two different branches of feminism?
In some ways, yes. In other ways, no. I mean, if you look at even their advocacy right from the very beginning, so this would be even before women's suffrage and all of that. And you look at cultural norms such as sort of default father custody after divorce, which is the way things used to be done. And the reason why they were done that way is because the man had the sole financial responsibility for taking care of the children. And he was at fault for the marriage breakdown. He would continue to have financial responsibility for taking care of his ex-wife in the form of alimony. But he would still have the children because it was his job to take care of them. That was his he was solely responsible for that. And you had activists like Caroline Norton in the UK around the 1850s or so, complaining that this situation really didn't serve women's happiness. And it was mostly talk around what would make women happy and how it was unfair to women that they were made so unhappy after a divorce because they lost their children. So they convinced the British government to change the law and policy called the Tender Years Doctrine, and what that did was it switched to everything to default mother custody. But at the same time, they kept the entire bill on the man. And now, even if a woman was at fault in a marriage breakdown, she would get custody of the kid, and he would be responsible for paying for alimony that the child was lumped in together with it. Because the kid's responsibility is also support the children, right? So you sort of have this transfer of rights without transfer of responsibility. And as far as I know, the responsibility did not swing the other way until equal rights legislation came around in the 1960s, right? So look at how they changed things, right? I do believe that there needed to be a renegotiation of gender roles and a renegotiation of rights and responsibilities of men and women. But in so many cases, what tended to happen was feminists managed to get rights for women without the attendant responsibilities that went along with those things for men. And what feminists would call the default father custody that occurred before feminism, they would call that male patriarchal privilege, right? Whereas nowadays, if you even suggest that, men should not be forced to pay child support, even for kids that were born out of wedlock, that they had no say in whether they would be born, that's considered unfair, right? That the woman who has the custody that's unfair to those women. Yet when it was men that got custody and responsibility, that was privilege, right? So I mean, they've really renegotiated things in such a way that women received a lot of rights and kept the responsibility on male master. And so, that's Karen, what I've always taken issue with.
So Karen, I get that, and that's certainly an interesting point historically and today, as we discussed in the beginning. Custodial rights is some of the things that I think you guys have the best points on. But women weren't allowed to own property. Men definitely made decisions in the household. They have to make all the business decisions. Since you're a woman, Karen, I assume that you're happy that feminists got you the right to own property, the right to vote, etc.
Again, with the property issue, that was a little bit one-sided too, because under coverture, a woman who was single was spousal, and she had every right to own property in her home and to enter into contracts with her own. This was the way it was for single right? For a married woman, because the responsibility for her financial well-being, all of the responsibility for the entire family, was seated in the husband and father. Because of that, of course he had the authority in the family, right? Of course he had the authority to decide how the money was spent. And another thing that feminists managed to do between the 1850s and the 1910s across most of the West was they emancipated women's property and income, not just from her husband, but from the entire institution of family, right? So it was still his responsibility to pay for everything, and her income was her own to do with as she wished. She was still entitled to his support, even if she made more money than him. And that even went all the way down to the tax burden on her property and income. That was not her responsibility to pay. That was his responsibility to pay, right? And at that time, women won the right, even when married, to enter into contracts. So they could enter into contracts with anybody, but most lenders were not stupid. They knew that they could not hold this woman accountable for her debt because it was her husband's job to pay for everything, right? And if she didn't have a husband, it could end up falling on her father or her brother, right? So they would require a co-signer. This was seen to be, vastly unfair, but there was a reason for it, right? And the reason was it was the man who was ultimately accountable for repaying the debt.
So I understand all that, and I think that you're generally making the case that the pendulum swung too far in giving unequal rights to women at some point. But even before the cases that you're referring to, women could, whether single or not, couldn't own any property. And now at this point,
I think you'd have to really look into that. I think you really would, because there were in the 1430s there were female master blacksmiths on the roster in London.
So Karen,
in the guilds.
Yes, it depends on the time period, the culture you're talking about, and how far back you go. Right? There's no blanket answer, so it depends.
Of course there isn't, but
but overall,
statements like women couldn't own property. Well, that's just not the case.
But Karen, for Christ's sake, you have to concede that men certainly had throughout history far more ability to own property and to be the masters of their own fate in terms of finance than women. You've got to concede that, right?
Certainly that is certainly true.
Okay, good. All right, so now aren't we in a vastly better situation, even if it isn't nearly perfect, today than we were in those years, and it's because of the hard work of women who got those rights for other women?
Well, like I said, I would have been much happier if they'd done it in a more equal way. One of the things that has happened is that we've come to consider certain things to be normal, like sort of the idea of a man being declared a default. He's the default father declared in court because he didn't contest paternity in the first 30 days after the child was born. There's a man who's facing jail in Michigan right now because he refuses to pay the $30,000 of back child support he supposedly owes for a child that isn't even his. And we've sort of come to see this this enforcement of responsibilities on men who sometimes had nothing to do with anything, like somebody who is not even the father of a kid, as just the new normal, right? It's just how it is. And these are things that can really destroy somebody's life. Now, one of the things that I always try to draw attention to is the fact that all of these things, all the way back to the beginning, to the 1850s, have been reformed in ways where, in every sense, a woman gains privileges and a man loses them. So we really have it hasn't just, the pendulum has swung, but it's really gone too far. And when you look at some of the complaints of modern day feminists, and this is really what it is, like if it was just equal rights, if that's all it was about, I would consider myself a feminist if that's all that there was. But there's all kinds of baggage attached to it. There's all kinds of theoretical baggage and the feminist lens and a system of philosophies and a worldview and ideology that's all attached to that and underpins what they do. And those, I feel, the theories are highly toxic. I think that they promote discord, they promote fear between sexes, they promote resentment, and they aren't good for anybody.
So Karen, look, when it gets to specific issues in the news, etc., we'll have to bring you back on and have further conversations. But just to round up this conversation, there's two other general points that I'd like to discuss. Look, when you talk about, if you say radical feminism or radical political correctness, there's another story out in the news today about how one of the city universities in New York is going to take away Mr. and Miss as titles because they think that it promotes gender inequality. How it does that, I have no idea, right? So do I think that there is a place for a men's rights movement to address how far the pendulum has swung and to address some of the issues where men are being treated unequally? Yes, I do. I want to make sure that the pendulum for men's rights movement doesn't swing so far that it becomes radical in the opposite direction. So, that's why I'm going to ask one more time on the issue of the right to vote. I mean, you can't just tar feminism with the brush of current day, some small strand of radical feminism. I mean, feminists got women the right to vote. Shouldn't you give an enormous thank you to them? Not just because you're a woman, but also because for the sake of humanity, they did a great service to all of us?
Okay, well, there were two movements there, right? There was the suffragist movement, and then there was the suffragette movement. And the suffragist movement was interested in votes for everybody. And a lot of them really resented the suffragettes, particularly a lot of female suffragists resented the suffragettes because the suffragettes got up to all kinds of crazy stuff. They lobbed bombs, they burned post offices, I read an account in a man's diary from back then that they tried to push him off a cliff. Out of chivalry, he didn't report the attempted murder. They got into all kinds of criminal activities and stuff like that. I mean, you could even say they were domestic terrorists. And a lot of the suffragists were like, you're just demonstrating that women shouldn't have the vote. I mean, and a lot of public sentiment back then, and this is the history that we don't get told. A lot of public sentiment back then was, well, if this is how women behave, should they get the vote? And another thing too, there were politicians in the UK who were discussing giving the women the vote long before the suffragettes started up, and.
I'm sure, Karen, if they continue to ask politely, men would have given it to them anyway. Men have been such sweethearts throughout history. I'm sure they would have just said, hey, women, even though we've denied you the right to vote for the entire history of mankind, literally mankind, if you just stuck around and been polite, we'd have given it to you anyway. Come on, Karen, you got to realize that's the biggest load of horse crap you've ever heard in your life.
They took a poll in England of women, and 70% of them didn't want to vote.
I know, and the women in Saudi Arabia want the burqa. I know, it's just the culture that they grew up with. Karen, give me a thank you. Look, everything's going great, but you're not being reasonable. You're being ridiculous. Give me a thank you. Give me a thank you for feminists for getting your right to vote. Otherwise, stop voting and go make your hands down.
The expansion of the franchise is a lot more complicated than what we've been on. The women in that poll, the main reasons that they cited was they did not want to be subject to the draft, and they thought that if they did, because this was the main justification for giving men the vote, and in most places, the amount of time between universal male suffrage and universal female suffrage was as little as 50 years, sometimes as little as 10, right? So it's never been a history of all these men had to vote and made women wait for millennia. No, men got suffrage because men took the draft, and SCOTUS even confirmed that in 1917 when the Supreme Court found saying the draft was unconstitutional because it was involuntary servitude, and SCOTUS outright said that the draft is constitutional because it is a reciprocal obligation on the part of citizens for the rights they receive from government, right? So you have we have this idea that these decisions, right, that these differences between how men and women were treated, we have been told that all of this was just sexist and arbitrary and it was for no good reason. It was just because penis, right? But that 70% of women in that poll, they were really concerned about the fact that they would have to take on all kinds of male responsibilities, that they would lose all kinds of privileges like the exemption from the draft, their right to financial support.
Karen, yada, yada, yada. Do you want the right to vote or not? Are you going to give a thank you to the women who fought so hard, sometimes risked their lives to get you that right to vote? Or are you going to just keep saying, oh, well, the women of Saudi Arabia love wearing their burqas, and the women in Britain who, while being oppressed and not having the right to vote, said that, yeah, they like bending their neck and telling men that, yes, we should vote, these silly little women. Are you going to give me a thank you for that, or you're just going to keep on blah-blah-blah on that?
And frankly, I think the last time I voted was 14 years ago in a municipal election. Like Mother Jones often said, you don't need to vote to kick ass.
All right, that's okay. You're radical, Karen. You're absolutely ridiculously radical. Look, I thought we were having a rational conversation, and I can establish, okay, here are the things we agree on, here are the things that are obvious, but you won't grant the most obvious thing in the world. Okay, you don't vote, so you think voting is not that important. All right, give me that right back then, and let's go back to the world where men are in charge and women have no rights. My guess is, Karen, you're not going to like that world. You're not going to like it at all.
I don't want to go back there.
You're using the voice that women fought so hard to give you now to fight back against women. There's a tremendous irony there.
Okay, so women didn't have a voice, even though women were key in the abolition movement. They managed most of the country to prohibit alcohol before they had a suffrage. Women have always had a voice. Women have been writing petitions to politicians, since they've been protesting for their rights since ancient Rome. You have a very, very different view of what history was like and the power imbalance between men and women was like before women's suffrage, before the feminist movement. I have a different view of how things were back then, and I absolutely know that with